Six of Crows, Folk of the Air, Raven Boys. What do these three series have in common? Well, they have the thing in common that after I read each of them in quick succession after each other, I was just done with reading. And I enjoyed them. So I was a bit confused how I could be so tired of reading in general. I was very worried about whether I just lost interest in reading or what was going on. And eventually all of this thinking led to me calling the thing I was experiencing tension fatigue. Tension is one of the major tools that an author has at their disposal. It is not simply how a scene is paced. It's also that, but it's also your use of progression in the plot. It's when you let which plot beats hit. It's your decisions on when to dole out information. It's your decision on how long to string your readers along until you give them some sort of satisfaction. And the thing about tension is that it's great at ramping up this desire to keep reading and I want to know what's gonna happen. It's basically what creates a page turner. But the downside is tension fatigue. And what is tension fatigue? I would define tension fatigue as the point at which a reader or viewer's yearning to know something in the story becomes so painful that they, as a defense mechanism, stop caring. Now, this isn't quite the whole story, because before you reach the point of not caring, there are other steps that you're going to be going through. These would be kind of red flags. The cycle is as follows. An element is introduced that the reader wants to know about, but the writer is doling out knowledge of this element in small enough increments to create tension in the reader. The reader keeps reading because they must know more about this element. As the author takes longer and longer between doling out pieces of knowledge, or if the pieces are too small, dissatisfying, or simply not there, the sweet tension starts to become impatience. Impatience becomes irritation, then frustration, and eventually, to defend themselves from any more pain, apathy. My best example of apathy was A Song of Ice and Fire. It's so weird because I loved book 3. It's my favorite of the A Song of Ice and Fire books. But then I hit book 4 and I just read a bit into it and I was like, no. I don't know what happened. I can't pick up that book. I can't pick up A Feast of Crows and be interested. I'm just like, nah, man, I'm done. And it sucks because I know a lot of great things are gonna happen and I want to read the next book when it comes out because I want to know what happens to my sweet baby Sansa. But I think what happened was that so many beloved characters die and then you start book 4 and you're just introduced to this new character in the prologue and they die. And then the next chapter you're introduced to a new character and I was like, no, I don't want more characters. I'm done with this. I don't want more point of views. And that's one of the things we're going to be talking about in one of the videos in Tension Fatigue is the use of point of view and how it creates tension fatigue, or at least can create tension fatigue. Since these 3 books left me with such a huge feeling of tension fatigue, especially because I read them right after each other and they each hit in different ways. Folk of the Air was just too fast and Six of Crows was too slow. Or not Six of Crows, Crooked Kingdom. I'm gonna get into that, the difference between the first book and the second book, or the first book is good and the second book has serious pacing issues. And then the Raven Boys, I felt like it kept making promises and not giving me them. It didn't even give me a promise and then was like, nope, not gonna happen. It was just like, it made a promise and then silence. And then other things happened and I didn't care about those because they hadn't been built up in the way that the things that never happened had. So it was this discrepancy between what I expected as a reader and what I actually got. And it was frustrating to read, whereas if I had actually been made to desire the things that came, and I'm not saying expect here, I'm not saying that I wanted to know those things were coming, but if I had been made to actually desire those things, I would have been more satisfied. And I wouldn't have been, because instead what happened was that I was constantly looking over here and expecting this thing. And instead this thing over here kept pulling at my attention. I was like, no, go away. I don't want you. So because these 3 series all had that impact on me, I'm going to be using those particularly as examples. So if you haven't read them, there are going to be spoilers. Sorry. I'm going to try to keep it to a minimum, and there's going to be general parts, but there's just, this is going to be difficult to do without examples. In this mini-series, I'm going to be talking about tension fatigue in relation to first plot, then romance, and then point of view, and then in the point of view video, I'm going to be just giving some overall things as well. And in this video, we're also going to be getting a little bit into romance, because all of the 3 books I just mentioned have strong romance plots, so it's kind of intertwined, but the video was going to be too long if I was making it into one video. So we're going to be going ahead and try it out. Tension is almost per definition a sort of pain, but it's a pain that is sweet enough to keep you turning pages and not become frustrated. Since writing a novel is a balancing act of having many different parts, you're always going to be doing one thing and waiting for another, so there's also always going to be some sort of tension, especially in longer works. But how long can you go between addressing things, or how long can you go before it's too late and the reader just doesn't want it anymore, doesn't care anymore? So let's say you're having a crew of 6 people who all have their individual trauma doing a heist. How often are you going to be focusing on the main plot, stealing the thing we're going to steal? How often are you going to be revealing things about the characters and their traumas through flashbacks? And how often are you going to be focusing on the here and now moment, but instead of on the forward plot heist thing, you're going to be focusing on the relationship between these 6 characters? This is a very difficult balancing act, and 6 of Crows, the first book in the 6 of Crows series, and Crooked Kingdom, the second book, both have this dilemma, but 6 of Crows does it well, and Crooked Kingdom does it, in my opinion, not so well. The first half of 6 of Crows is heavily dominated by character introductions, interactions, and flashbacks as Cass assembles his team for his biggest heist yet. The characters Cass, Inesh, Nina, and Matthias are introduced in pairs because Cass and Inesh have this special bond, and Nina and Matthias have a special bond. Jasper is kind of left hanging until Wylan is introduced, and then they get paired off. And these are the 3 main character interactions, although they're also broken up by the Nina Inesh and Jasper Inesh interactions as well. So the story grounds itself by making Cass its main focus, and everyone's relationship with Cass is also getting a certain kind of focus and time in the spotlight, because the problem here is that if you were going to focus on each relationship between the 6 characters, you're going to have like 15 different relationship dynamics. You had a lot. So 6 of Crows can be broken into the following parts. There's the assembly part, then there's the trip plus flashbacks, then there's the heist plus a few more flashbacks, but they're less prominent, but they're very important in what they show, and then there's the climax without flashbacks. 6 of Crows relies heavily on flashbacks, and I was kind of surprised when I read it because I thought it worked very well, and usually flashbacks is something that authors have told them, no, you can't have them. But it worked very well here, and it works because the characters have a lot of baggage, and that baggage impacts what's happening now. So for instance, why does Cass wear gloves? Why doesn't he want to get intimate with anyone? Why is he such a cold bastard? You want to know, and you want to know the things that happen between Nina and Matthias. You want to know why Inesh is so bound to Cass, why she can't just leave him. And so because you have all of these questions, each flashback actually feels important, and it adds value. And even when we're late in the story and we're during the heist, then the things that happen there are actually provoking flashbacks, and the characters are actively using the flashbacks to give themselves courage to do other things. For instance, Inesh is working through her trauma with working as a prostitute. She was captured, made a slave, and sold into prostitution, and she works through that in the story, has traumatic flashbacks, and then eventually decides to overcome it. So it has a very powerful effect, because the flashback is not just something we're told about something that happened, it's a present thing in her life, and so it works. It makes in no way for a fast-paced story, but it was very fulfilling, and it was character-driven, and when something is more character-driven, it's not as important that it is fast-paced. It was a little bit confusing because it's a heist, and you were thinking, oh, this is going to be fast-paced. It's not, but it's very good, and I think Six of Crows is very much worth checking out. Crooked Kingdom is also worth reading, but it was frustrating. Crooked Kingdom has so many flashbacks. I felt like it had more flashbacks than the first one. And the problem here is, I know the characters, right? I got to know them in the first book. I don't need a whole bunch of more flashbacks. I don't need to know that Jesper had a nice relationship with his mother and that he's sad she's gone. I know that. I know that from the way that he acts in the world, key things that he has said throughout. I know this. I know that he's scared, that he has these magical abilities that gets people killed, that got his mother killed. I don't need a sentimental flashback, especially not in the middle of them getting attacked by the enemy. That's the wrong place to put that flashback. That flashback shouldn't have been there. And that's just one example that really stuck out to me, but there are so many of them in Crooked Kingdom. And it's just like, focus on the story, man. I know these characters. What I was there for in Crooked Kingdom was to see the progression, to see where are they gonna go now? What's gonna happen to them? Who are they gonna become as people? And instead I just kept getting more info about who they used to be. And they all were really stuck because it felt like the author had this idea of where it was all gonna end. And that ending was not very far from where they stopped in book one. And so she had to fill out the whole book with flashbacks, I guess. And I think the whole story would just have worked better if she had given the reader what we wanted and had gone further in the relationships. So this is totally spoilers for where Crooked Kingdom ends. But what it wanted to end with was Cass and Inesh holding hands, Cass finally starting to overcome his fear of touching other people, and Matthias dying and Nina returning to the north, and Wylan and Jasper ending up together in the mansion with Jasper helping Wylan read. And these were not big developments from where we were in the first book. So I just think if the book had been like with Wylan and Jasper, instead of pulling it out, just let them be together earlier with Nina and Matthias, it would have been nice if you had dropped a bunch of the flashbacks and had given Matthias a proper way to deal with how his people were in the city, because he betrayed them. And I kind of like the way that he dies, how he is just killed by this random kid who views him as the traitor. And that had a cool effect, but in view of how little plot there actually was in the book, giving Matthias more to do would have made it stronger. And then finally with Cass and Inesh, you could have just moved further along in their relationship. You could have let them touch earlier and let them develop into more earlier. And I know you want to end them with Inesh being like, you know what, if you're not gonna be doing anything, then I can't be with you and I need to move on. And him being like, nope, because I can hold hands now and I brought your parents to see you, who you haven't seen for years. And she's like, oh, Cass. And I know you want to end it with that, and it was really beautiful, but it was just too little. I waited the whole fucking book for like the 4 Cass and Inesh scenes that are in this book. And it was so frustrating because Cass and Inesh are wonderful, but there's too little. Another issue in Crooked Kingdom was that it kept doing this thing. And that was a tension thing too. It kept doing this thing where it was like having one scene where you're following the characters and they're doing something in the heist. And then at the end it goes wrong. And then we skip. And you're like, wait, what what's happening? So you're interested in that, and then you start with the next chapter, and it's like the characters are doing something in the heist, and you're like, oh, it's gonna go wrong, and then it goes wrong because the other thing went wrong, so you know it's gonna go wrong. And then it cuts off there, so you don't get to see that thing either. So now you're thinking, oh, we're gonna be going back to this thing. No. We're gonna go to a new thing with new characters who are doing things and having flashbacks and thinking about things, and then things go wrong, and then we cut off. And then we return to these guys, but we don't see the thing that happened immediately after things went wrong. We just skip, and it was just... There was a good plot, but the book either needed to be shorter, cut a lot of the flashbacks out, and focus more on the action, or more actual character development needed to be there, because this was just frustrating. It was a whole book of almost nothing. So let's talk a little bit about 3-act structure and tension fatigue, because 3-act structure can be the savior from tension fatigue, but it can also be the arbiter of tension fatigue. Because as I just talked about, the author of Six of Crows or Crooked Kingdom wanted things to end a certain way, and you kind of knew they were gonna go that way from the beginning. You knew where the 3rd act was gonna end unless they all die. And it meant that it was very predictable and was kind of boring going through this slog of flashbacks in order to get to where the book was going. And so 3-act structure gives you these beats that you can hit. But sometimes, perhaps you've placed your beats wrong. Maybe your climax, or the emotional thing you've put as your climax, is not actually the climax. Maybe it works better if you place it earlier and let the natural progression of the climax be the next climax, be the real climax. It's very difficult because, especially in the last book of the series, the end point becomes more and more clear. But I think that a very good example of how to break expectations is the Liveship Trilogy, which starts out with you thinking, oh, well, the ship gets stolen, and the family is going to get it back, and that's going to be the story. And then Robin Hobb is like... But the great thing about Robin Hobb is that she slowly makes you want other things to happen. You basically, without spoiling too much, you have, like, let's say you have this relationship as the end goal. And then... But then this character is slowly developing a relationship with this character, and you're like, I want this, I want this, I want this, and then you get this, and you're like, and that was a really, really great way of doing it. So slowly making readers want something different than what they first thought they wanted is a great way of doing it. Now, I would still have been quite satisfied if I had gotten the thing I originally wanted, but I thought it was a great subversion of my expectations to go over here instead. That's a difficult thing to do. And it's very difficult that as an author, you have to be like, the climax is kind of known. So how am I going to make the journey there the interesting thing? And throwing in a bunch of flashbacks that don't add anything is not the answer. The 3-act structure is also important because it provides you all of these wonderful plot points that you can use to plot your story, and each plot point, from the first plot point to the midpoint, the pinch points and the darkest moment and the climax, these all serve as both releases of tension, because they release the tension in the act leading up to them, but they also create new tension because they changed the situation. Maybe they raised the stakes, but even if the stakes are raised, the situation is changed in a way that creates new tension. So you also have to remember that it's not just that too much tension is bad, it's too much of the same tension. It's if we go an entire story thinking, will they, won't they, and then they end up together at the end, you're kind of like fatigued at the end. But if it's will they, won't they, and then they get together at the midpoint, and then it's more like, okay, how are they going to deal with this issue in their relationship? Then you're still engaged in their relationship and you want them to become closer, and that's still the tension, but the tension has changed in its dynamic. So just to give an example of good and bad tension, giving 2 examples of bad use of tension and one very good use of tension. And the first is the good use of tension, which is Cruel Prince, That's the first book in the Fog of the Air. And the thing about Fog of the Air is that I really, 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 really loved the two first books. The Cruel Prince and Wicked King are just so great. I was not ready for the ride that I was brought on, but I was so on board once I was there. And then Queen of Nothing hits, and I just read through Queen of Nothing. I was really engaged. It was such a page turner, and there were several times when my heart was pumping in my chest. I just wanted to know how it was going to end. But I remember that after I put the book away, I became progressively more dissatisfied with the story. I didn't feel that I had been given things that I wanted. And I became more and more sad and angry. And that's not a feeling that's very good to leave in a reader. It means that I will be wary of reading other Holly Black books because I felt betrayed. I felt that I was not given the end of the story that the story deserved. And I know that those books were published very, very quickly. She wrote them quickly. And so I just think that it would have been better if book 3 had been delayed for like 6 months so that she could get to create a stronger plot for Queen of Nothing. But back to Cruel Prince. The great thing about Cruel Prince was that it kept you on your toes. Right away, we know that what Jude wants, Jude, who is a human, who was brought to the Fae world by the man who killed her parents and who is now her foster father. That's a fucked up relationship, and it's great. And it's handled really great. So you have Jude, and all she really wants is to fit in with the fairies. So she wants to prove herself as a knight. And so you think, okay, she's going to be going out and become a knight. And that's kind of the end goal. But then very quickly, the story pulls the rug on you and it's like, no, she can't become a knight. There are some things happen that puts her on a different direction. And then you start to realize that there's not a specific end goal. The end goal is become as fucking powerful as she can among the Fae. And every time a new possibility presents itself to Jude, she's like, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And because this very interesting development where it's snowballing and you're like, what is she going to do next? What is she going to do next? And you're just on board for the ride. And all you know is that she wants more power, that she wants to keep her relationship with her sister good, and that this is going to become difficult. And you know that there's some very difficult tension things between her and Maddox, her foster father who killed her parents, and you know that the Cruel Prince is going to be some part of the journey because the book is called The Cruel Prince and he is the Cruel Prince, and also because of the build-up. So there's a twist in The Cruel Prince that was not so surprising, but some people find it annoying. I found that it worked well because I was expecting it, so I wasn't led to believe this other thing was important. I was like, yeah, I know that's not important. But it served another purpose later, which was great. So I just thought that worked very well, and it worked very well in Wicked King as well, where things kept snowballing and getting more and more insane. And it was just this breathless experience because Jude never got to have a fucking moment of rest, and you never got to have a fucking moment of rest. And then it ends in Wicked King, spoiler, with the Cruel Prince, who is now the Wicked King, banishing her after they made this deal. And you're like, you just can't wait to get to book 3 and be like, she is at the lowest point in her journey. What is going to happen now? And then Queen of Nothing comes. And it's like all of the things that were promised were not allowed to fully develop. The things that we knew was that Jude was an awesome fighter and an awesome strategist and an awesome assassin. She was power hungry and furious with Cardan for what he did to her after she started to trust him. So she doesn't trust him anymore. And you as a reader is also like, why did Cardan do this? Is Cardan still cruel? Or did he have some other reason to do it? And it turns out that Cardan was actually just playing with her. He was messing with her. They just got married. Nobody knew they got married. But he was like, he phrased it like, only someone of the royal family can pardon you. So she could have pardoned herself. She could have come back the next day, but she doesn't figure that out. And he thought she would figure it out. But she was just so convinced that he had betrayed her because she didn't trust him yet. that she did not see that. And I thought that was clever, and I thought that was fun, but the problem here is that the author wanted to keep using the previous tension of Cardan and Jude being kind of enemies in book 3, which just didn't work because Jude loved him and felt betrayed by him, but his betrayal was not real. It was a game that kind of went wrong, right? So if they just get to talk together and have a proper conversation, everything's gonna be fixed. And so, of course, what does Holly Black do? Keep them from having a fucking conversation for at least half the book, and then when they get together, it's still like they can't figure out how to talk together. And then they finally talk together, and then he turns into a snake. I'm not kidding. He turns into a snake. And then they can't talk together because he's a fucking snake. And then she saves him, and he becomes himself again, and then the book ends. So it's so ridiculous when I say it was so frustrating to read. Because if you really wanted to create true tension between them again, you could have done something different. You could have had Jude go off into the human worlds, which she was banished to, create an army, then force her way back into Fae, thinking she's still not allowed to go there, and be like, I have an army now, you have to pardon me, and then I have this army and we can fight together. And he could be like, it was a joke, yo. And then she's kind of like, her pride is hurt, and she could be like, whatever, I'm still powerful in my own right, you're still gonna have to work to make me trust you. Like, and because then you would see this arrogance come back in her. So if you wanted to go that way, you could have done that. You could have made them actual enemies and then have them become frenemies, allies, and then go that way. Or you could have just let them meet up earlier, have that fucking conversation, have them be a couple for the rest of the book who actually work together and not have him become a snake. But that whole thing, you can hear me talk more about in my Queen of Nothing video. I have a whole video on that topic, so go watch that. And then the third example is just the Raven cycle, the Raven Boys. Which one is it called? Raven Boys? The one with Blue and Gaines. So in the first book of this series, Blue, who is a girl from a family of mediums who can see ghosts and predict the future and stuff like that, she has always been told that if she kissed her one true love, he would die. She has the ability to enhance other mediums' powers, but cannot herself see people. But then on that night, when the people who will die in the following year walk through the ley lines, she sees one ghost. And that can mean one of two things. Either she kills him, or it's her one true love. And so we assume it must be both. And so 3 things must happen after this. Blue and Gansey must meet and fall in love. There must be a conversation where Blue tells Gansey that he will die and that she might be the one to kill him. And 3, there will be the kiss when he dies. Those 3 things are immediate expectations that are created from this moment. All of those 3 are shat upon completely, in my opinion. Because this is the very first scene. So you think, okay, if you know plot structure, you're like, okay, they're at least going to be meeting in the first act. But it might be already like a few chapters in, like before the first act ends. No. When the first act ends, you're still just going around kind of hearing about these guys and Blue and their lives, and it's just kind of nothing happens. And then about, I think it's like 33% in, they finally have their first conversation, which is not a conversation. It's just Gansey and the other boys go to the restaurant where Blue works, and Adam is interested in Blue. Gansey goes to tell Blue that Adam is interested in her. And then after that scene, Adam and Blue exchange phone numbers, and we're led to believe that they might be starting to date. So that's a subversion of your expectations, right? Because you thought that You thought that Blue and Gansey would be falling in love, but instead she's gonna go down the Adam and Blue route. And Blue and Gansey don't have their first proper meeting until like 40% in, when Gansey and the other boys go to meet the mediums where Blue lives, because they need to get some info from them. And so it's very drawn out. Like, these plot beats are basically what happens for the first half of the book, and you're like, when is something going to happen? So it's this very frustrating feeling of nothing happening, and then when the things that you expected would happen actually do happen, it's kind of meh. And then Blue and Adam start to date, and that creates this problem where Gansey and Blue kind of falling in love with each other because they don't want to hurt Adam, but it doesn't really work because Adam and Blue stop dating so quickly, and then Adam and Blue just don't seem to really care for each other for the rest of the story, and they don't interact, and it's just this weird thing. And then suddenly Blue and Gansey are in love. It just feels very out of the blue. And then finally at the end, Blue kisses him and he dies, but then he's revived immediately afterwards. And this is how a lot of the plot beats go in the Raven Boys. You're made to expect something, and then if it happens, which it often doesn't, but if it happens, it's just this meh thing. I guess some people think it was done well. I think some people actually like that their expectations weren't met. It felt realistic in some ways. But it didn't feel realistic to me, because I felt that there were some natural actions following the information that they had that they just didn't do. Like, the author specifically decided they're not going to do these actions because I don't want to walk into the reader's expectations. But it just felt frustrating to me because I was like, why are none of the characters who have figured out that Gansey is gonna fucking die trying to protect him or prevent it or talk to him about it? Instead, just suddenly in book 4, we're told that Gansey figured out pretty quickly that he was gonna die, and then he's just kind of fine with it. It was so frustrating for me. That being said, there are some really great things in Raven Boys. I think that the friendship between the 4 guys is really, really great. I don't think Blue is as well executed, and I really liked how there were some very problematic elements in their friendships, especially between Adam and Gansey, which was like almost codependent or something. Like, it was very interesting, and it was interesting to see Adam kind of grow out of that, and it was very pleasing to see Ronan become this awesome character, especially in book 2. Book 2 is my favorite. And then see Ronan and Adam end up together. But it was kind of frustrating that I was led to want Blue and Gansey, and then I got Ronan and Adam instead. But why couldn't I have had both? Why couldn't you surprise me with this great couple and still build up the other 2 as a great couple? And so now that we're talking about romance, I think it's time to move on to the next video. Thank you for watching. I hope that this was useful in some way. At least I get to vent a little because it was so frustrating. I'm kind of over the tension fatigue now, reading other books, but I have moved towards slower books. I'm reading Doctor Strange and Mr. Norrell right now, and I'm going to be talking about that because I am hooked. I'm going for slower books right now just because I kind of feel like I don't have the stamina for wanting something and not getting it for so long anymore. Anyway, stay tuned for the next video, and please comment about what you think about especially the 3 stories I've been talking about here. Were you frustrated by the mismatch between what we got and what we were promised in the Raven Boys? Did you really like them? I know that a lot of people like them, and I get it. I could see the appeal as I read them. Sorry. I could see the appeal as I read them. It just didn't work for me. And I'm interested in hearing whether it worked for you, and if it did, have you experienced tension fatigue with other stories? What stories? Tell me so I can avoid those stories. No, of course not. I think I was just very unlucky that my point of tension fatigue was pushed by reading these 3 books in quick succession with each other. So stay tuned, like, subscribe, comment, ring the bell.